My name's RJ, and I'm an alcoholic. Left to my own devices, I am not here today. I don't want to be here today. I was sitting in my house last night, and I had my feet up on my little lazy boy couch, you know what I mean? I was watching the Louisville-Miami game on my big flat screen TV in my own home, you know? And my pregnant wife, 36 weeks pregnant, was sitting on the ground painting a pumpkin with my boys, painting pumpkins for Halloween. And my dogs were laying down on the ground next to them, and I just couldn't help but think, like, this is the kind of shit they write about in books, you know? And in 2018, I was currently in the Utah State Prison in STG in Uena 2 and had been for the last 4.5 years, you know? So I owe Alcoholics Anonymous every single thing that I have today. So when there is a service commitment, when there is something that needs to be done in order, and I'm able to help, I always say yes. You know? Fuck a BYU and Utah game, you know? Like, realistically, you know? They haven't done anything to improve my life other than raise my blood pressure. So, you know? So here we are, right? What is Alcoholics Anonymous? What's the big book, right? Kind of important to know if you're going to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, especially with all the newcomers here today. So what I really liked was the first paragraph I read in the Ford of the first edition, which is on XII. And I always make all my new sponsees read this before we start working any steps so they have an understanding of what they're getting themselves into, right? It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Okay, so what is AA? AA is a group of people that have recovered from a seemingly helpless state of mind and body. And what is the big book is a roadmap on how to recover. Pretty easy, right? So that's exactly what AA is, and that's exactly what the big book is. And today I plan on trying to share my experience, strength, and hope with you guys, try to tell you guys what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I'm not going to try to get into too many war stories, but I'm going to try to validate myself so you guys understand I've been where you've been, and I felt the way you felt before. And then I'm going to try to talk about all 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous before I wrap it up at the end, right? So I have... I see on the beam over there it says to be honest. So I'm going to be honest with you guys because my favorite kind of alcohol is whiskey that comes with a shot of meth on the side. That's the kind of alcoholic I am, right? Nothing cured my drinking like drugs and outside issues, you know? So that's a big part of my story, right? It was never a goal of mine to become an alcoholic. It was never a goal of mine to become a convict or a drug addict or anything like that. I come from a really good home. My father is my hero. He's a best friend of mine. I talked to him multiple times today. I talked to him throughout the week. He's my rock. He's somebody I look up to. And if I can ever become half the man of my father, I know I've arrived, okay? And he was lucky to become half the man of his father, right? I'm named after both of them. My firstborn son is the fourth of a long line of people that I dearly respect, you know? My mother, with that being said, is a drug addict. I don't call her that because she wasn't around. I call her that because she told me that. She wasn't in my life at all. Growing up, I didn't see her from the age of an infant till I was 16 years old. I saw her one time. That's the entire time I've ever seen my mother. She added me on Facebook about 3 years ago after I had a few years of sobriety and just told me that she was admiring the man I was and hopefully one day that she could get sober, right? So that's my mom. My sister just got out of prison in Texas for manufacturing narcotics. She did 5 years out in the Texas Department of Corrections. I have 2 half-brothers. They both live in St. George. And I don't know, right? They can stay sober for a couple years, and then they'll go off the wagon. So those are my siblings. That's my dad and my mother, right? That's just a little bit of family background. With that being said, I grew up not needing anything ever. I had no wants as a kid, right? If I needed something, I had it. Sports were huge for me. My father was a single father, so what he would do is he'd drive me to my grandmother's house every morning before school. My grandmother would have breakfast made for me, eggs, waffles, whatever I wanted, like legit breakfast. She'd go over my homework with me, and I'd walk to school from my grandmother's house, right? My grandmother lived in a really nice neighborhood. up by Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake. So I grew up right above Rice-Eccles Stadium, right? I'm really nervous and my mouth is drying up. So that was kind of my life, right? I don't know what it was. My therapist in rehab will tell you that I felt inadequate as a kid because I had mommy issues, right? I look back at it and I don't think that I had fears of you guys not accepting me of who I was when I was 7 and 8 years old because of my mother issues. I think when I was being made and God made me, like he just forgot to sprinkle in something, you know? And I grew up feeling like 51 cards and a 52 card deck, right? Like there was just something missing. And so what do you do as a kid is you find like little Band-Aids that make you feel complete, right? And I found that in sports. I played every single sport you could think of, and there wasn't a weekend throughout the entire year I wasn't doing something. I played basketball, baseball, I wrestled, I ski raced in the wintertime, I played football. I did everything. And every time I would score a point, score a touchdown, win a ski race, whatever it was, all of a sudden people would cheer and clap and cheer and clap, and I'd get these attaboys, and I would feel like there's that last card I was missing to make a complete deck. I would feel like I was complete. I would feel like I've arrived, right? I was safe. I felt good, you know? And this was my first external solution that I ever sought out for this internal problem that I have struggled with my entire life, right? Looking at it now, is that untreated alcoholism? Am I running by 1,000 forms of fear, right? I don't know. I'm 8, right? I've never had a drop of alcohol. So that was kind of my crutch, right? I would do that, and I would still go out. I'd be in a room full of people, and I would feel alone, right? I'd have all the friends in the world. I had no problem getting girls in school. Like, I had all these things that looking from the outside in equates to, like, that kid's doing it, that kid's going places, he's successful, you know? But inside, I would never feel that peace. And the only time I ever felt real peace is funny because I remember feeling this when I got sober is I go to my grandmother's house, and my grandmother was like an angel from heaven, like unconditional love, like just, she was my girl, you know? And she'd like tickle my back and sing to me when I'd sleep at her house, and I would just, I could breathe, you know? Like I knew that she loved me for me, and I could breathe again, you know? And then the next day when I got up and left grandma's house, I was in a constant state of anxiety, like holding my breath, like everywhere I go, like who's looking at me, what are they thinking, you know? And that's really how I lived my life, and it's an exhausting way to live. You know, at the age of 14 is when I tried alcohol for the first time. And my father's the kind of man that's like, hey, this is how we act. We act accordingly, right? There's a line in the sand here. This we don't do on this side of the line. We act right, you know? So when my friend came downstairs with a bottle of vodka and some pills from his mother's cabinet, it was like, whoa. My dad warned me about motherfuckers like you, you know? I know better than this. This is not on the side that we deal with, right? This is something we don't do. We act accordingly. We don't do this. And I was more terrified of what my friends would think of me if I wasn't down to drink and drug with them. Oh, you're a punk. Oh, you're a bitch. I can't handle that. I'm so full of fear. The only thing that matters is what they think of me. So I get drunk that night. You know, we pop some Ambien, take some shots of vodka, and there I am. I could breathe again. I'm complete. Right? This is what I've been searching for. It wasn't on a football field, right? That was cool. But this feeling right here, now I feel like I am what I'm supposed to be, right? I am who I am supposed to be right now. And so now, like logically speaking, why wouldn't I do that all the time, right? Like I feel good now. When I don't do this, I feel terrified of everything and everybody, right? So let's go. So that was my first experience drinking and drugging. And yeah, it was great. It was so much fun. I'm not the kind of individual that can get loaded without consequences. And consequences for me come swiftly. At the age of 15 was the first time I went to Genesis for stealing cars. I think I did a 6-month stint at Genesis trying to pay off restitution for stolen cars I crashed. At the age of 18, I went to a house party. And I jumped some kids outside the house party. I stole their wallets and everything else they had on them after I beat them up. And I got charged with aggravated assault and aggravated robbery. And at the age of 18 years old, I went to the Utah State Prison for the first time. And that was a real experience, you know, because there's no crutch. You can't go get loaded. You can't do any of these liquid courage things that you did as a kid to get you the courage to go even fight in the first place, you know. And it was the only time I ever seen my father cry. Like I was in shackles, and the judge sentenced me to prison at the Utah State Prison. He dropped the 1 to 15s down to 0 to 5. I went there on a 0 to 5 aggravated assault, and I looked back, and my dad, he whispered to me, he said, "I'm so sorry," and he started crying, you know? And that's my guy, you know? Like, he felt like he failed me, you know? Still hurts my feelings today to think that I put my father in a position like that, you know? How fucking selfish of me, you know? So I remember getting on the prison bus with dudes that are just like jacked, like tattoos all over their face, you know, slung down like grown men, you know, 30, 40, 50 years old, like lifetime convicts, you know, and I was just an 18-year-old kid fucking scared, you know, and but you know what we do as alcoholics, like we have all these stage characters, we have all these masks that we put on, you know, like I want you to see what I want you to see, and what I want you guys to see when I'm in the joint is a violent gang member, you know, because that's who's got any pull in the joint, you know, a womanizer, right, a hustler, like these are the things that I became, and I did the next 4.5 years in prison that time, and that time was the first time I went to the joint, and I got this thing called IPP, so I did all these different jail tours. Like I went to Beaver County for a couple years, Daggett County. Like I did all these different jail things, right? And then I got out of prison, and that was the first time like I had messed around with drugs. Mostly we would do shrooms, whatever, some ecstasy, go to the raves, hit some after parties, and that was the first time I was ever introduced to meth, was at the after parties. But when I got out of prison this time and started going to AP&P and doing classes, I hooked up with a group of girls and a couple of my friends from prison, and we started using a lot of drugs. And within 6 weeks, I got out of prison. I just needed a year to terminate. I made it 6 weeks. I went from smoking a little bit of dope to intravenously using meth, and I caught charges in 7 counties across the state of Utah. And I made the 5 o'clock news on KSL for a $10,000 meth bust in a high-speed chase from Vernal to Heber, and I got caught in a G-ride out there and went back to prison. And it's funny thinking about it now because I feel like I'm talking about somebody in the third person, you know? It's like, man, that was stupid, you know? But they gave me 18 months, was all on violations and the dope charge. And 90 days before the gate, the white boys that I rolled with in the joint, they bucked on the cops in Ochre 2, and I bucked with them. I got my date pulled. They sent me to Uinta 2 for the next 4 years on a rehearing. I ended up doing 5.5 years. So I got out of prison. I was 30 years old. And last thing I remember, I was 18 years old playing football at Skyline High School and running around trying to chase girls. And now I'm 30 years old, and I'm a violent gang member convict that has absolutely no life skills at all. I've never had a job. I've never had any responsibilities. I don't have any kids. I've never had a real girlfriend. The only thing I've ever done has been a selfish individual, and I'm a failure in every aspect of my life. I have 0 things to do. One thing happened in prison, and then I'll start kind of getting into some good stuff, was I'd made a call to my sister, and this woman answered the phone, and she was super drunk. And she was kind of talking shit on me. She was asking me how Bubba was treating me in prison and stuff, you know. And I was like, you're not going to talk to me like that. And I hung up on her, you know. And I married that woman. That's my wife. I married her. So, yeah. A lot of guys know her. She works at Ardu, but shout out to Ardu. But, yeah, so I ended up marrying that woman. And when I was in prison, I told her, I said, you know what? Like, she was like, I have a child. Like, I have a young son. I was like, shit, I'm trying to be a dad, you know. I'm going to get out. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your son. I'm going to be a good man. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to stop messing around. Like, I can do this. I have something to fight for. I want to fight for you, right? And I did. I meant it. I've never had anything to fight for, right? I get out of prison. I move in with her, and I get a job. So I get out on a Tuesday. Thursday, I got a job digging ditches for an underground installation company. Within 6 months, I got my Class A CDL, tanker endorsements. I'm foreman of that underground installation company with a company truck and a company credit card, making $23 an hour. I'm paying all the bills. I'm doing exactly what I told her I was going to do. Life is good. Right? Let's go. Motivation, right? Motivation and drive is what I got. But what else I got is I got a disease called alcoholism, which is a progressive disease. I know this now because if I wasn't an alcoholic, my life would have continued to get better. But when I put down alcohol and drugs, my life gets fucking worse. Okay? I go to a University of Utah game. Check that out, right? If I'd been in an AA meeting, maybe this wouldn't have happened. I go to a University of Utah football game with my dad in 2018. And we go to dinner first, and I have a couple of beers with my dad. And the entire game, I can't think of anything except putting a needle in my arm. I can't tell you anything about the game. I can't tell you the score. I can tell you that they beat the Ducks that year, right? And instead of going home, I got in my truck, and I drove to the block, and I got high for the next 3 days, right? My wife at the time was pregnant with our son, and she was calling me, and I'm paralyzed by fear and shame and guilt of what she's gonna think of me and what she's gonna say to me if I answer the phone and she knows I'm high. So I choose to ignore her phone calls. And she's sitting at home crying, pregnant, trying to get a hold of me, and I just throw the phone on the ground. I'm not worried about her crying. I'm worried about, A, how am I gonna save my face, right? How am I gonna make this look not as bad as it is, right? These are the things that are going through my head, not what my pregnant wife's worried about, right? So on Sunday night, I show up and I start crying and I tell her, listen, I relapsed, but it's okay. I got it under control. Please don't tell anybody. I'm really embarrassed, right? She called everybody looking for me to see if I was still alive. And on Monday morning, my boss showed up before I could leave for work and fired me on the spot, right? So 3 days with my alcoholism, the kind of alcoholic I am, I lose everything. I'm a manipulative, selfish, egotistical, crazy Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic that can hide it. I'm a sleazy drug addict that you'll find at the Colonial or on the block at North Temple because I know where the boys hang out, right? Like that's the kind of drug addict I am. That's the kind of alcoholic I am today, you know? I still am. I'm one choice away from that, right? The next couple years of my life were the worst years I've ever had, okay? I was a complete user and abuser of everything and everybody in my life, you know? That beautiful grandmother I told you about, the most important person in the world to me, she was diagnosed with dementia. And we had my baby shower at my grandmother's house before she passed away. And I just remember like grandma, like she just wasn't there anymore, you know? And then the next day after my baby shower, I believe it was that same week, she woke up and she was confused on where she was at because she would often wake up not remembering where that she was in her own home, you know? And she was wandering around trying to figure it out, and she fell down her stairs and she broke her back, right? So I went to the hospital and I spent the night in there with the hospital there. The next morning she came home on hospice care and she passed away. And this is probably the most demoralizing thing I've ever done, but when my grandmother passed away, I was supposed to be a pallbearer and I'm a speaker at her funeral. And I'm sitting outside of the church ready to go inside. And I'm so, when my alcoholism says, get loaded, I get loaded. So I get so high in my car, I go inside the funeral house and I can't speak. So they have to pass on me because I can't talk. I decide not to ride in the limousine and I drive myself and I get so high on the way there, I hold up the entire funeral for 30 minutes waiting for me before I carried my grandmother to her final resting place high on alcohol and meth. Right? 2 days later, my son was born. I cut his umbilical cord high, and I held him for the first time high. This is the kind of guy that Neil asked to come talk to you guys today, you know? So what I'm trying to paint here is the unmanageability. I would wake up on Friday, I'd be like, okay, you can get high on Friday, but on Sunday morning, you need to stop getting high so you can go to sleep on Sunday, and then you can wake on Monday, and then you can go to work. Well, Sunday night comes around, I can't sleep. Monday morning comes around, the only thing that my alcoholic mind tells me is that I need to get loaded again in order to stay up to go to work, right? This is the unmanageability that I have in my life. This is the powerlessness that I have in my life. Once I put a substance into my body, I lose all control and all power. I no longer have the choice. That's the powerlessness I have. I have a mental obsession and a physical allergy. You give me anything. I don't care if it's a Neurontin, Suboxone, a beer. It doesn't matter. You get that and you put it into my body and I'm off to the races every single time. Every time. I'm happy to know that I know that today. So it was August 8th, 2021, and I was in my car by myself and I was ready to try to commit suicide. And my wife called me, and I don't know what it was. It was a moment of clarity. Call it God, call it what you want. But I decided to answer the phone. And I was crying, and I just told her I can't do this anymore. And she said, let's get you into a treatment center. I got into a treatment center, and I stayed for like 4 hours. I drove myself, and God's funny because I believe this is all God. So I show up to this treatment center. It's called Alpine Recovery Lodge. So I go there, and they have an AA meeting, and what they did was they put on the Brandon Novak video, if anybody's ever seen that Brandon Novak video. And I never heard somebody talk about alcoholism. I never heard anybody talk about addiction like I heard that guy talk about it. And I knew right then and there, whatever that guy had, I had what he had, and I needed to do what he did. And the only person that needed to hear this and watch this video was my wife. And currently I'm on blackout, and so they won't let me call home, so I need to leave, you know? Yeah. So I'm like, I'm out. They give me my keys. I go jump in my car, and I have a flat tire. And now everybody in the whole house is standing on the porch, and they're yelling, RJ, it's God. Come back inside. I said, no, it's not. It's a flat tire. I got out to change my tire, and I don't have a lug nut lock key, and I can't get my tire off. That's not God. That's just an obstacle. So I drove down the canyon. I drove down the canyon on a flat tire, and then I put some Fix-A-Flat in it, and I raced home to show my wife this video. But on the way, I stopped at North Temple, and I got loaded for the next 2 days. I never made it home. Right? Like, how did I get here? I was just about to kill myself. I had a moment of clarity. I checked myself into treatment, and here I am in the exact same spot ready to kill myself again 2 days later. Right? I'm powerless. I have no shot at this unless I have a solution that's better than what I've been using, you know? So I didn't get sober that time, August 8th, but I got sober in November 12th, 2021. I just relapsed. I went to detox, and then I went to a place called the Palace in Orem. I raised my hand on a Tuesday. I said, my name's RJ. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I just don't want to be a drug addict anymore. That's what I said. And my sponsor at this time, he lives in Boston now, but he spoke next, and he said, you know, when I was new here, I sat down and I shut the fuck up. And he looked at me, and I was like, oh, I think he's talking to me. So I shut up and I listened, and there was a couple dudes in the room that day, and one of them's my new sponsor. He's been my sponsor for the last 3 years, and a couple of them, the other ones are still here today, you know. And he came up and talked to me after the meeting, and I asked him if he'd sponsor me, and I jumped in his truck that night at the Palace, and he had me open up the book, and he had me read the ABCs. That we were powerless over this thing, you know, and we started working the first 3 steps. And next to ABC, he had me write HOW, which meant honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. It was easy for me to be honest with myself that I was an alcoholic, right? Like, if you're questioning it and you're new, like, think about it this way. I've heard somebody talk about this. Like, how's your relationship with your family right now? You know, at the time, my wife wanted to divorce me. My kids were scared of me. How's your job? I don't have a job, right? How much money do you have in the bank? I have a Cash App card, right? I don't have a bank account. It doesn't even have my real name on it, you know? This is where I was at, right? So at that moment, I was probably 2 weeks sober, and I had absolutely nothing to my name. I was a complete failure in every aspect of my life, and I would say that was pretty goddamn unmanageable. Right? So that's the first step, right? We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. That's kind of a two-parter, right? I know that I'm powerless over alcohol because I can look back at my life and I could say, hey, I took a beer here and I woke up 7 days later, right? I did this here and I woke up there. You know, every time I do this, I go to prison. Every time I do this, obviously I have no power once I put something into my body, right? That our lives have become unmanageable, so we know about that. So then we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Okay, I grew up in Utah. Everybody knows the prominent LDS religion out here, right? I grew up in this. I have absolutely no resentments for the church. As a matter of fact, the God of my understanding today is the exact God of my understanding that I grew up with in that church. Okay, I have a kind, loving God, and He accepts me for who I am, for the good and the bad. Right? I've always known that. There's no doubt in my mind. I've been in prison. I've read the scriptures. I've done these things, and I've seen it work in my life, even when I was using drugs and alcohol, right? I know that God exists. My problem with step 2 is that why would God want to help me? Why does God want anything to do with somebody like me? I mean, I have victimized every single person in my life and every single stranger I've ever come across. If you're in my life at any point in time during any time when I was using, it was for a reason. Right? It was a selfish reason. So why does God want to help somebody like me? Okay? My sponsor told me to put that stuff aside. Set aside everything you think you know and be willing to make a new experience to this stuff, you know? So I did. I set it aside. He said, you believe in God, then you believe that He could restore you to sanity and restore you to full health? Absolutely. If God wanted to, He absolutely could. Welcome to step 3, guys. Don't overthink it. That was my other thing, is I overthought everything. He told me, RJ, at this point in your recovery, you have no business thinking. Stop thinking, just listen. That's what he told me. I was like, cool, let's go. So we started getting into the 4-step. This is where most of my sponsees will bail because they're so embarrassed on the things that they think that they have done, right? There's nothing that you can tell me that I haven't done. Most people, you know, a lot of people that come in here, then they're just true alcoholics, true drinkers. They don't have a drug background like mine. It's like, okay, guys, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was drunk and I pissed in my wife's closet. You know, put that on your 4-step. Well, I've been shooting meth for the last 7 days. You do some fucking weird shit, you know? So now I have to tell everybody all the weird shit I've done. That is a daunting task, bro. Because I'm out there and I have these lines that my dad instilled in me, like, these are concrete lines. Like, I'll never step over that line. And then I start stepping over that line, and I start stepping over that line, and I start stepping over that line. And now every single moral belief I grew up with is gone, you know? So I've done just, I mean, there's nothing that a sponsee of mine could tell me that I haven't done, right? I mean, gang violence, all that kind of stuff. And so what I did with my 4-step is I told him exactly what I thought he wanted me to hear, just like my therapist told me, right? My therapist is like, RJ, let's talk about it. And so I would tell her exactly what I thought she wanted me to hear. You know, maybe I'd even give her a little bit more just so she'd get off my back, you know? So it was like, oh, lied, stole from my grandma. I wrote all these things down, and I did my 4-step in a day, you know? And then I met up with my sponsee after that, and we were at the parking lot of Walmart in Springville. And we were in this white rapo van, you know? I don't know how else to explain it, okay? And I would get in his van, and we start talking, and there's cops driving around. I'm like, bro, maybe we should drive somewhere else. You know, he's like, bro, we don't have anything to hide from, you know? So we start going over my 4-step, and I could tell he knows exactly that I lied, that I just bullshitted my way through this. And he threw my 4-step on the dashboard. And he said, RJ, I'm going to tell you the worst items I had in stock, the ones that I had to tell my sponsee in order to get free, you know? And then he broke down, and I could tell he was telling me the truth because all the hair on his arms were standing on end, you know? And he started telling me these stories that he had been involved in and, like, was almost in tears. And he said, now, RJ, I know what's keeping you sick isn't on this list. He said, I need you to be completely honest with me and with God today. I need you to tell me what you're not telling me, what's keeping you sick, you know? And I don't know what it was. It was probably that same moment of clarity that I had when I went to treatment. And I broke down and I told him these things that were in my life, you know, like these icebergs that were just huge. And I told him everything. And then after I told him, he got out of his van and he came over to the driver's seat and he opened it up and I thought he was kicking me out of his van, right? I was like, I knew I shouldn't have told him that. Now he's going to kick me out of the van. Now he's going to go tell everybody what I told him. I knew I shouldn't have trusted him. And instead what he did was he gave me this huge hug and he squeezed me. He told me, RJ, I don't think any differently of you. And I love you and I accept you for who you are. And just like I was back at grandma's house, it was like, whew. And I knew I'd entered the world of the spirit, you know. I knew at that moment right there, I was going to be able to stay sober as long as I continued to talk to these dudes and do exactly what they told me to do. I took all their suggestions from there on out because right then and there, I had a peace and a presence that was far greater than any substance I had ever put into my body, you know. And I remember that moment. I can tell you exactly where I was at and I can remember it. And I like to go back and think of it all the time because it gives me a lot of peace, you know, and it lets me know that this thing really works. So he said, RJ, from now on out, I want you to carry, he told me this in the 3rd step, but he was like, everywhere you go now, you have a new employer, right? And what you do for a living, what you do for money is completely separate from your primary purpose. Your primary purpose is to start helping other alcoholics. And everywhere you go, your employer goes with you and your employer is God. So act accordingly, right? So everywhere I went, dude, I just started thinking like that. And I remember it started working because, I got sober in November and I went to the grocery store, Walmart in Spanish Fork, and it was snowing and I had all my stuff and I took my shopping cart out to the car and I put all my stuff in the car and I grabbed my shopping cart and I fucking threw it in the parking lot, right? As one does, right? It's snowy. Why would I walk it inside? They have people for that, you know? And I turned to go back up my car and what he told me was like, hey, your employer's with you everywhere you go. And I was like, pulled back in, got out, grabbed my shopping cart and I walked it inside, you know? And it was like, all right, maybe this psychic change is working. Maybe what they're telling me, just do what they say, do the work and watch what happens. Maybe it's actually working. You know, there was a bunch of things like that. Like I remember I shook a candy machine and all the candy fell out. And I grabbed it and I fucking smashed it, you know, as one does. And I had to drive back there and I paid for every single slot, right? Act accordingly. Act like your higher power is with you because he is, right? It says, if you go read chapter 2 of the Gnostic, God either is or he isn't. What is your choice to be, right? That means he's everywhere. If your choice is that God exists, that means God is everywhere. It's not just God is in this room and in the parking lot. You can go back to being a selfish jerk off. No, God's in the parking lot too. God's in your house. God's in your car. God is with you everywhere. You know, and if you start taking on that perception, if you start taking on that mindset, your life will change, right? I remember being in treatment, and they would always talk about God. I'd be laying in bed, and I'd think about God, and I'd paint like a picture in my head, like what's God look like? And I'd take the picture I grew up with, and I'd be like, all right, well, he's probably sitting on a nice chair, a gold robe, you know, and I'd paint this picture of God, and I put God in a box about this big. When you take on that perception that God is everything or else he is nothing, it's impossible to put a face to God. It's a beautiful thing, you know. My wife's higher power is love. And she's right. God is love. Light. God is light. The sun, the moon, every single star in the sky, that's God, you know. I climbed Mount Timpanogos with one of my sponsees last year. And I just remember thinking, there's no way this is a happenstance. This is designed. Dude, somebody made this beautiful, you know? That's because God is in those mountains. He's in every single tree, stream, everywhere. God is everything. And the fundamental idea of God, it'll tell you in the big book, is in every single man, woman, and child. That means all of you. God is within all of you, right? So how am I going to treat you? I'm going to treat you accordingly, you know? That's how I've started changing my perception today. And I can tell you sometimes I have flare-ups, but for the most part, like I treat people as if I was walking with God's children, because that's what I believe I am doing, you know? And it's part of my prayers every morning, you know? So that was my 4-step. My 4-step was really powerful for me, you know? It was the step that I took the least serious, and it was the step that had the biggest, most profound impact on my recovery was my 4-step. Step 6, 7. They call step 6, 7 the step that separates the men from the boys, right? I've heard my friend Robert says, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole with my character defects, right? I'll have anger pop up, you know, and I'll whack that one down. Lust will pop up. I have all these character defects. I'm acutely aware that I'm not a perfect man. I'll never will be. And I just continue to practice these things, you know, and in the first part of your recovery, my suggestion is to listen to your sponsor. But what I did in the first part of my recovery was I said the 6th and 7th step, I said the 7-step prayer, and I kept it pushing. I don't think I could have comprehended my step 6 and 7 as well as I did when I did it in 18 months sober, right? Because what I did when I first got sober is I worked the steps rapidly, and then I got into service. But when I was about 18 months sober, I was going into a treatment center to go share my story one time, and I was miserable, you know? I went in there, I shared, everybody clapped for me, and I felt okay for a second, and then I went to my car, and I felt miserable again, and I felt like a failure again at 18 months sober, you know? And I called my sponsor, and we talked about step 6, 7, my character defects, my emotional sobriety. I read this thing from Bob D talking about how he thought he was in for another 5-year fit of depression. Right? But why wouldn't the steps apply to the depression like they did his drinking? You know, and he talked about his emotional sobriety. And that's when I got into the 12 and 12, especially step 6 and 7 and the 12 and 12. And I started reading it, and I realized I was doing all this stuff for the wrong reason. You know, I had gone right back to the solution I had when I was a kid, when you would cheer for me after a football game. And I would do all this service only because I knew that I was going to get something out of it. I was a very selfish person doing this service, right? And in the 12 and 12, in step 6, 7, 12 and 12, it talks about camouflaging your character defects. I mean, you're talking about alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and powerful. Look at your character defects, right? Greed, right? Everyone's like, oh, I just need more money, money, money. No, for me, what it looked like was, oh, I can volunteer and get overtime even though I don't need it. Let's go, right? Oh, that's greedy. I should be at home with my family. I could go to meetings. I don't need the money, but there I am working 65 hours a week. That's my greed camouflaged, right? As doing stuff for my family, right? Oh, you need help moving? Let me come help you. Neil, take a picture of me moving his couch so I can put it on Facebook, right? Right, that's me doing things for the wrong reason, right? That's me just camouflaging my selfishness to feel better about the way I do it, right? Lust, all these sort of things. This is the kind of stuff that I'm acutely aware about today. That's why today I try to go out and I try to do things for the right reasons, you know? And that's really what it came down for me with my emotional sobriety. This is something that I still work on today, but I have way more peace because I try to do things for the right reasons. And I try to be of service at home as well. So step 6, 7, don't trip on it. Like, just do what you're going to do, but really start focusing on it like after you get a little bit of time, because you'll be able to do a more thorough step 6 and 7 in my personal opinion. Step 8 and 9 is I already had my step 4 done. So what my sponsor has me doing, what I have all my sponsees do, is I flip it over to the back. And here's where on the people I've harmed, I flip it over and I write all of my financial amends, right? I owe credit one $1,000. I stole $800 from my grandmother. I stole this, you know, and I write all my financial amends down. And then we go out where we can and we start making amends, right? This is step 9. Step 9 was really, I blame it on my step 4 because I just did such a bullshit step 4. But then I got my peace when we had our conversation that my people I'd harmed list was really a lot of my family and my friends that like all they wanted was for me to stay sober, you know? And so I was like, oh, this is easy, you know, this is easy. Nobody wanted any money from me. And then I went to Reflections Treatment Center after I had 30 days of sobriety. I walk in to Reflections Treatment Center, and my best friend Morgan was in there. And the moment I saw him, I remembered what I had done to him when we were in high school. I had stolen a lot of money from his brother. And a few years later, his brother took his own life. And after the meeting, I pulled Morgan aside and I said, hey, I need to make an amends with you. Do you remember when that money went missing from your brother? I can't make it right with him. I need to make this amends with you. And he asked me to help him find him a sponsor. And I was able to help Morgan find a sponsor. And Morgan's been sober ever since. And me and Morgan had the same sobriety date of November 12th, 2021, you know? And it was that moment I knew why they always said, like, your primary purpose is to help other alcoholics. Because Morgan will tell you today that he never would have thought of Alcoholics Anonymous if I hadn't walked through that door. God put me there for a reason. And then the moment I saw him, the first thing I thought about was I had to make an amends. And this is where the amends have come into my life now, you know. It was lied to my dad on my 4th step. I call my dad like once a week and I'm like, hey, do you remember this? And now I'm able to make an actual amends with my father. I make them all the time, you know? Like, I'm really sorry I made you feel this way, Dad, about this situation. And it wasn't just a, hey, I'm really sorry about lying and doing all these drugs, Dad. Okay, bud, just stay sober. Now I'm able to have like an adult conversation with my dad, and I'm really starting to make like genuine amends. It is, I can't tell you how refreshing it is to not have to look over my back. As the kind of man that robbed every single person I've ever known, it is a refreshing thing to be able to go out and make amends to people, especially ones that weren't on your list that I'm able to see on the streets or see come up across on Facebook. I'm able to make those phone calls. I don't hide. I don't run away. I immediately make those amends now, you know. Step 10, 11, and 12, we work these all together. These are our daily disciplines, right? Step 10, we're going to meditate and pray daily. I try to do this every single day. Is where I'm an asshole. I also do spot check inventories throughout my day, right? 10, 11, and 12. I pray and meditate daily. I continue to take a personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, promptly admit it. Sorry, guys, I'm tired. I meditate and pray, and then 12 is 90% of the program, right? Step 12 is carrying this message to other alcoholics, right? That's the entire fucking program, okay? Everything I've talked to you about, the whole story before and after, and all the way up to step 11, that's 10% of it, you guys. The whole program is what you're going to do for the next alcoholic. What kind of service are you going to bring to the next alcoholic? Because that's what's going to keep you sober. Who's relapsed a bunch in here? Okay? Yeah, me too, right? I can't stay sober, right? So what does the big book? What does the big book say is the problem, right? When I look at the big book, it tells two things stand out if I'm relapsing, okay? One, it says if we did not take a thorough inventory, we won't stay sober. It says it in your 4-step, right? So if you keep relapsing, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my 4-step. What did I leave out of my 4-step? Because it says if I don't stop, if I leave something out of my 4-step, I'll stay sick, right? So what did I leave out of my 4-step? And then the second thing is, are you working a step 12? Because if you're sponsoring people, if you've had a thorough 4-step, it says you will not fail. So that's what I've been doing. One thing I could tell you I've always done perfect in my recovery is when I get a call, I say yes. You know, I always try to stay in service. I always try to stay with sponsees, and I always try to keep somebody in the book. So if you do need a sponsor, let's do it, right? So that's step 11, 10, 11, and 12. Now, I'd like to talk about a little bit about what my life looks like now, you know. I've walked through a lot of stuff in my sobriety, okay? In November 2023, I have this little tattoo me and my wife got. It says, you'll forever be my favorite what if, right? We got pregnant in 2023, and then at our 20-week checkup, we went in and our baby didn't have a heartbeat. So when we're halfway through our pregnancy, we lost our baby at 20 weeks, right? That was 2 years ago in November. So we have to go to the hospital. We're in the hospital for about 3 days, and every time my wife woke up, I was standing next to her, holding her hand. Every single time. Without fail, every time that she came to, I was with her, you know? Which is a big jump of what it was like when I was an alcoholic. Because when I was an alcoholic and my son was in the hospital, my son had to have cranial reconstructive surgery twice. When he was 2 months old, he had to go in and have head surgery. And my wife said she needed to go to the car, and she reached her hand in my pocket, and I had a pocket full of meth and syringes, you know? This time, every time she reached over, it was my hand, you know? That's thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That's thanks to when hard things happen today, I don't immediately run to the dope, right? These are things I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. I tell you, I always keep a sponsee in the steps. Well, I had a sponsee, his name was Tyler. He was 23 years old. We were working his 4-step, and he relapsed, okay? And I know exactly the way he felt, because every time I relapsed, I felt like a failure. Every time I relapsed, I was filled with shame and guilt, like I was the biggest piece of shit that's ever walked this earth. And after he relapsed, I said, hey, buddy, you need to let me come get you. We need to get you into a meeting. And that night, he hung himself. He killed himself, right? That was that is alcoholism. That is death by alcoholism. Yeah, he didn't drink himself to death. He didn't OD, but he couldn't find that solution. That's alcoholism. That was his only way out. That's the only way that he saw. But fortunately for all of you, if you've ever felt like that, there is a solution, and it's in this room right now. You don't ever have to feel the way you feel today ever again, for one day at a time for the rest of your life, right? The solution's right here. I always like to talk about Tyler. He was such a good kid, and that is, I'm one drink away from that, because I know exactly how he felt, you know? There's been other hard things. We got pregnant again. We made it 16 weeks. We lost that baby too. And we really felt like giving up on all this kind of stuff, you know? And then miraculously, I guess if you're not trying, you're trying, you know? Gratefully, my wife right now is 36 weeks pregnant with a healthy pregnancy. And our baby is due in 4 weeks in November, right? Almost 2 years to the date of when we lost our first baby, you know? So we're super nervous, but super excited for that. My life has gotten like huge. Like I said, my sobriety date is November 12th, 2021. So in a couple weeks here, God willing, I'll have 4 years, right? I started in a 4-plex. I'm not going to tell you I had cockroaches or nothing like that, but it was a little tiny 4-plex, you know? I had delivered bounce houses. I'd done all these little tiny jobs. And then I got a decent job at this company called Mortensen Construction, building the Facebook data centers out in Eagle Mountain. I started making $19 an hour, right? I worked there for a year and a half, and I worked myself into a survey position. And then I left that company. I've been at the company I've been at now for almost 3 years. I'll be there for 3 years in March. And I'm now a senior crew chief land surveyor at Valley Land Surveying, right? I have a company truck that I lost back when I was getting high, right? I got that company truck I get to take home. I got that company credit card back. I've got all that stuff back. I'm making more money today than I've ever thought I could make in my entire life. I went from a 4-plex to a duplex, and I just bought a 5-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in PAYSON. I've been in there since January. So I've almost owned my own home for a year in January. We're about to have our first Halloween. We just had a huge baby shower there. We're going to do Thanksgiving at our house. We're going to start making family traditions, you know. Christmas is going to be huge. I bought blow-up dolls and shit and little skeletons, and I decorated my yard, right? You look at the return missionary across the street, and I'm shitting on his house. You know what I mean? I never dreamed somebody like me could have a life like that, right? My dad remembers me seeing me on the news and be like, thank God he's going to be in prison for a few years. I can breathe again. And now he comes over to my house and I'm wearing a collared shirt and decorating my house. You know, it's extremely cool what this program can do for you. I never imagined I could do anything like this, you guys. In April, I'll graduate from the College of Engineering at UVU. I have a current GPA of 3.85 overall, and I've only had one B the entire time. I've gotten straight A's, right? My goal is I'll be able to get licensed as a land surveyor in April after I get my college degree, and I plan on opening my own company, right? These are things that, I mean, everybody has good plans or whatever, and maybe it's going to change, but so far right now, like I have goals and aspirations, and I know the only way that any of this can be accomplished is through what you have shown me and you have taught me in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because left of my own devices, you guys, I'm chilling in Uinta too, right? I'm on Baker Block. Well, I guess it's not that anymore. Whatever it is out there. You know, you guys know what I'm saying though. Like my best moves, my best thinking, I end up in prison, right? And honestly, like I thrive in places like prison and treatment. Like, let me go hang out with the homies, throw some pinochle and work out. Okay, let's go. But now I have like a life beyond my wildest dreams. I take my kids to Disneyland. I take them to Lake Tahoe every single year. I just took them to Bear World in Yellowstone this summer. Like my life, you guys, I cannot explain to you the gratitude I have for all of you in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I know that I could not have done it without the steps and taking the suggestions and doing what you guys have done before me. You know, like people like Neil, you know, how many years, Neil? 20 something, 22 and a half. And every time I come here, he's here. You know, there's guys like Daniel that I see in my sponsor, and all these guys that show up all the time, every day for somebody, you know, and they've been doing it for 30 years. And those are the guys I strive to be like. I remember when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a few guys, and everyone I talked about, be like, who's that? They'd be like, that's so-and-so, he's a good guy. I remember sitting in prison, I'd always daydream. And I wouldn't have daydreams of like winning the lottery. I wouldn't daydream about like being a big old thug or a gangster. I would daydream about being a good guy. It was so weird. Like I just daydream about like being a hero and people like respecting me and loving me for being a good dude. And today, like because of what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, like I feel like when people talk about me, like RJ's a good guy today, you know. And that's something I really feel like I can hang my hat on. I'm really proud of. How do I do this every single day? Like how do I do it? I do 4 simple actions every single day. And you can do this whether you have 22 years, I'm sure he does, or whether you have a day and you don't like the way you feel right now, and you don't know how you're going to stay sober. Well, this is what I do every single day to stay sober. I wake up in the mornings and I hit my knees and I talk out loud. You know, if you have a problem with the word prayer, don't pray. Don't say, dear God, don't say amen. But you need to get on your knees, you need to show some humility, and you need to talk out loud, and you need to say whatever's in your head and your heart every single day. The next thing you need to do is you need to pick up the big book and you need to read a sentence, a page, a sentence, a paragraph, a page, or chapter every single day. I don't care if you open it up and read chapter 3 of the Agnostic and put it away. You need to open that big book every single day. The third thing you need to do is you need to call your sponsor, and you need to practice being honest out loud. I'm a liar. You know, where are you? I'm on the freeway. I just passed Center Street. But really, I'm on University. Where'd you have lunch? I went to McDonald's. Why are you eating a Frosty? You know, it means nothing, right? But I will lie to you. I am a compulsive liar. So I need to call somebody and I need to practice being honest out loud, because the occasional inspiration will become a working part of the mind, right? I'm going to practice being honest out loud. I cannot think my way into right acting. What I have to do is I need to act my way into right thinking. And how I do that is by my feet moving to what my mouth is saying, right? I tried to outthink this thing my entire life. They say the hardest people to get sober are the smart and the rich. You know, the rich are going to throw their money at it, and the smart people are going to try to think their way out of it, you know? I'm neither smart nor rich. So I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to work my way into right acting, okay? This is how I do it. That's my third thing. The fourth thing I do is I try to be of service every single day. So I'm not telling you to go sign up for a bunch of commitments. I'm telling you to do something kind for somebody. Open the door for the lady at the store. Buy somebody a drink behind you. What being kind is taking time out of your day to improve somebody else's, right? That's what I consider. I consider those 4 simple actions. This is what I do every single day. And I can tell you without fail, for the most part, I do these things every single day, you know? I can always tell when I'm living in alcoholism because I'll become irritable, restless, and discontent. I'll go back to the drawing board. Where was I selfish? Where was I not doing my dailies? Where was I this? And then I know exactly where I need to restart. And it starts by hitting my knees and talking out loud. You know, I can always get back in the situation. This door, it doesn't slam shut. It goes in and out. It's not hard to open. All you need is the key of willingness and to get on your knees and start over again. You know, you don't have to relapse every time you have a bad day. You know, there's a solution here. Pick up the phone, call your sponsor, come to a meeting. I promise you guys, if you're having problems, you don't have to feel like that ever again, one day at a time for the rest of your life. Just come to Alcoholics Anonymous and we'll help you get there. I will end a little early with that. I'll take another 24. Thank you.